Yugoslavia, a country of mountains and rivers, where borders cut across faiths and languages. For decades, it stood together under one man, Josip Broz Tito. His rule kept the peace, holding Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Slovenes, Macedonians, and Montenegrins inside a single federation. But when Tito's coffin was carried through Belgrade in May 1980, silence fell across the land. And with that silence came fear. Without him, who could hold this patchwork nation together? And how long before old divisions tore it apart? You are watching Erahive, where history speaks. A patchwork of peoples. The Balkans have always been a crossroads. Empires rose here and empires fell. For centuries, the north was ruled by the Habsburgs. The south belonged to the Ottomans. And in between, cultures, faiths, and languages mixed, but never fully blended. Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes dreamed of unity, but each carried memories of wars, of occupations, of neighbors turned enemies. After World War I, the old empires collapsed. In 1918, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovens was born. It was the first time all southern Slavs shared one state, but unity came at a price. The Serbs, victorious in war, dominated the new kingdom. To many Croats and Slovenes, it felt less like a union and more like Serbian rule. Tensions simmered. By the 1930s, Croatian nationalists, known as the Ustaše, rose in violence. In 1934, they assassinated King Alexander I in Marseille. The dream of brotherhood was already cracking. Then came World War II. Germany and Italy carved Yugoslavia apart. The Ustaše created a fascist puppet state in Croatia and unleashed terror. Serbs, Jews, and Roma were hunted down. Tens of thousands were murdered in camps like Jasenovac, where brutality shocked even the Nazis. In response, Serb royalist Chetniks fought for a greater Serbia, but the strongest resistance came from communist partisans, led by a man named Tito. By 1945, it was Tito's army, not the exiled king, that had liberated Yugoslavia. The partisan victory laid the foundation for a new federation, one that promised equality among 6 republics: Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. It was a bold vision, but built on centuries of mistrust. The question was never if these fault lines existed. The question was whether they could ever truly be erased. Tito's Yugoslavia. In the ruins of war, Tito promised something different. A Yugoslavia not ruled by kings or foreign powers, but by its own people. By 1945, the monarchy was gone. The Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was born. 6 republics, 2 autonomous provinces, and 1 capital, Belgrade. On paper, each republic was equal. In reality, Tito was the glue that held them together. He ruled with charisma and with fear. Factories were nationalized. Workers were promised self-management. Tourism on the Adriatic coast grew into a lifeline. By the 1960s, millions of Western tourists visited Yugoslavia each year. Unlike its neighbors behind the Iron Curtain, Yugoslavia walked its own path. It broke with Stalin in 1948, shocking the communist world. It became the leader of the non-aligned movement, standing proudly between East and West. Yugoslav citizens enjoyed freedoms others in Eastern Europe could only dream of. They could travel abroad. They saw Hollywood films. The world saw Yugoslavia as modern, open, and strong. But Tito's rule had shadows. Opponents were jailed, silenced, or sent to Goli Otok, a prison island where cruelty was routine. The army, dominated by Serbs, was powerful and ever watchful. The secret police reached even into Western Europe, hunting exiled dissidents. Still, for ordinary people, Tito was a hero. He had beaten Hitler. He had stood up to Stalin. He had given the dream of unity a face. In 1980, when Tito died, 500,000 people came to Belgrade to mourn. It was the largest state funeral in history. But as the coffin was lowered, so too was Yugoslavia's last defense against its old divisions. Without Tito, the cracks in the federation could no longer be ignored. After Tito's death in 1980, Yugoslavia lost more than a leader. It lost the balance that kept its many nations together. The 1974 Constitution had already given the republics more autonomy. Now, without Tito, the central government in Belgrade was weak. Each republic looked inward, protecting its own interests. At the same time, the economy faltered. Yugoslavia had borrowed heavily from the West. When global recession hit, debts came due. Factories closed, inflation soared, and unemployment rose. Inequality deepened. Slovenia and Croatia, richer from tourism and trade, resented sending money south. Bosnia, Kosovo, and Macedonia struggled with poverty. The dream of equality among republics was breaking apart. In Kosovo, tensions exploded. The Albanian majority demanded more rights, even their own republic. Serbs, seeing Kosovo as their historic heartland, resisted fiercely. Protests in Pristina in 1981 were crushed with violence, but the wounds only grew deeper. Throughout the 1980s, nationalist voices grew louder, and in Serbia, a new figure emerged, Slobodan Milošević. He spoke to the fears of Serbs, promising protection and strength. To many, he sounded like the answer. To others, he was a warning of what was to come. The fragile unity Tito had built was cracking, and soon, those cracks would split wide open. The fire ignites. By the late 1980s, the storm could no longer be contained. In Serbia, Slobodan Milošević rose quickly through the Communist Party. He spoke of defending Serbs, not just in Serbia, but wherever they lived. In 1989, on the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo, he stood before a vast crowd. On that sacred field, where Serbs remembered their defeat by the Ottomans, Milošević declared, "No one will ever beat you again." It was more than a speech. It was a call to Serbian nationalism, and it sent shockwaves across the federation. In Kosovo, Albanian demands for equality turned into demands for independence. Milošević stripped the province of its autonomy. Protests were crushed. Tensions hardened into hostility. Elsewhere, the mood was shifting too. In Slovenia and Croatia, leaders pushed for more freedom from Belgrade. They wanted a loose confederation, not Serbian dominance. By 1990, multi-party elections brought nationalist governments to power. The fear was clear. If Slovenia or Croatia broke away, what would happen to the Serb minorities living there? In Croatia, armed Serbs declared their own enclaves. Clashes began with police. Roads were blocked. It was called the Log Revolution. By June 1991, the inevitable happened. Slovenia and Croatia declared independence. The Yugoslav People's Army, still dominated by Serb officers, was ordered to stop them. The fire of nationalism had become war. The Croatian and Slovenian Wars. Slovenia was the first to test Belgrade's resolve. In June 1991, its government declared independence. Yugoslav tanks rolled toward the borders, but Slovenian police and local defense units blocked the roads, seized barracks, and stood firm. For 10 tense days, firefights and standoffs shook the small republic. Dozens were killed, but the war was short. The Yugoslav army withdrew, and Slovenia was free. Croatia's story would be far bloodier. There, Serb minorities, backed by the Yugoslav army, resisted independence. Roads were cut, villages burned, and neighbors turned against each other. By the summer of 1991, full-scale war had begun. In the east, the city of Vukovar came under siege. For 3 months, it was pounded by shells and bombs. When it finally fell, the city lay in ruins, and thousands of civilians were dead or displaced. On the coast, Dubrovnik, a jewel of medieval architecture, was besieged as well. Images of flames and rubble shocked the world. But while attention focused on the ancient city, countless other towns in Croatia suffered the same fate. By early 1992, much of central Croatia lay under rebel control. A ceasefire, brokered by the United Nations, froze the front lines. Blue-helmeted peacekeepers arrived to guard the fragile truce. But this was only a pause, because as Croatia bled, Bosnia was about to erupt. In March 1992, Bosnia and Herzegovina declared independence. But in this republic, the divisions ran deepest. Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs lived side by side, yet each dreamed of a different future. Bosnian Serbs, backed by Belgrade, refused to join the new state. They proclaimed their own republic. Almost overnight, Sarajevo, the capital, was surrounded. Snipers haunted its streets. Shells rained down on markets, schools, and homes. The siege would last nearly 4 years, the longest in modern Europe. Elsewhere, villages burned. Bosniak families were driven from their homes. Men and boys separated from women and children. Massacres followed. It was called ethnic cleansing. For many, it echoed the darkest crimes of the Second World War. Croats in Bosnia also declared their own mini-state, supported by Zagreb. At first, they fought alongside Bosniaks against Serbs, but by 1993, even Croats and Bosniaks turned their guns on each other. Bosnia had become a three-sided war, with civilians caught in the middle. Images of starving prisoners behind barbed wire shocked the world. The United Nations declared safe zones, but these zones often became targets themselves. Srebrenica, in 1995, would prove the most horrific example. The war in Bosnia showed the world the depths of hatred unleashed when a nation falls apart, and it forced the question, would the outside world stand by, or would it finally act? As Bosnia descended into chaos, the world could no longer look away. The United Nations sent peacekeepers, but with weak mandates and little force, they became bystanders to the violence. Safe zones were declared for civilians in towns like Srebrenica, Zepa, and Gorazde. Yet the Bosnian Serb army ignored the blue helmets. Massacres followed, and trust in the UN collapsed. By 1994, NATO entered the war. For the first time in its history, the alliance used force. Fighter jets enforced no-fly zones over Bosnia. Airstrikes struck Serb positions after mortar shells hit Sarajevo's marketplace. But the Serbs responded with terror. Over 150 UN soldiers were taken hostage, chained to potential targets as human shields. The message was clear. Intervention carried risks. Then came July 1995. In Srebrenica, more than 7,000 men and boys were executed. The atrocity shocked the world, and pressure for decisive action could no longer be ignored. When Serb shells once again hit Sarajevo's market in August, NATO launched Operation Deliberate Force. For 3 relentless weeks, bombs rained on Bosnian Serb positions. Their artillery was destroyed, their grip weakened. At last, they came to the table. In November 1995, peace talks opened in Dayton, Ohio. The deal was signed the following month in Paris. Bosnia was to remain a single state, but divided into 2 entities, the Federation of Bosniaks and Croats and Republika Srpska. The war in Bosnia was over, but Yugoslavia's tragedy was not. Even after Bosnia's peace, the Balkans remained uneasy. In Kosovo, Albanians made up the majority, but under Serbian rule, they faced repression, job loss, and discrimination. Through the 1990s, peaceful protests filled the streets. When nothing changed, a new force emerged, the Kosovo Liberation Army. By 1998, they were striking Serbian police and officials. Belgrade answered with overwhelming force. Villages were shelled. Families fled into the hills. Reports of massacres spread quickly. The world remembered Bosnia. The United Nations demanded restraint, but Milošević refused to back down. In March 1999, NATO acted. Operation Allied Force began. For 78 days, bombs fell on Serbia and Kosovo. Bridges, bases, and government buildings were hit. For the first time, a sovereign European state was bombed without UN approval. The Serbian army fought back with decoys, with camouflage, even shooting down a stealth fighter, but the pressure was too great. In June, Milošević agreed to withdraw. Kosovo was placed under international protection. Though still part of Serbia on paper, it now lived apart. Nearly a decade later, in 2008, Kosovo declared independence, a status still disputed today. The Kosovo War marked the end of Yugoslavia's bloody unraveling, but it also marked the beginning of Milošević's downfall. The bombs had stopped, but the wounds of war were far from healed. By the year 2000, Serbia itself turned against Slobodan Milošević. Mass protests swept Belgrade. He was forced from power, the end of his rule and the end of an era. Soon after, he was sent to The Hague. There, before the International Criminal Tribunal, he faced charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He would never hear his verdict. In 2006, he died in his cell. Others did not escape judgment. Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic were convicted of genocide. Hundreds of commanders and politicians were tried, though many victims felt justice came too late. But trials could not undo the human cost. Across the former Yugoslavia, more than 100,000 people had been killed. Millions were forced from their homes. Entire towns and villages were left empty, their memories haunted by loss. Weapons from the wars flooded the black market. Criminal networks thrived in the chaos. Even years later, echoes of that violence reached far beyond the Balkans. Yet life went on. Slovenia and Croatia looked westward, joining the European Union. Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Kosovo each followed their own fragile paths. Some still dream of unity, others carry only bitterness. The wars of Yugoslavia ended on paper, but the divisions of faith, of language, of memory remain carved into the land and its people. The story of Yugoslavia is more than the fall of a country. It is the story of people bound together, then torn apart by fear, ambition, and history's weight. For some, it is a warning of how fragile unity can be. For others, it is a reminder of how deep wounds can shape generations. Even today, in the cities and villages once united under one flag, memories of war remain close. And the question lingers, can the Balkans ever truly leave the shadows of Yugoslavia behind? If you found this journey through history meaningful, support our work by liking this video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing for more stories from the past. You are watching Erahive, where history speaks.